She's laughing with a whiteboard clear, unpacking a fresh pack of pens, never willing to accept sincere. She's loved in many channels, every gay change on nights and black blue lights. Heaven help them when she recites. Mysterious life, girl got skills. She moves in space with minimum waste and maximum joy. Makeshift desk and a cat that bites. When you see her coming, take your pills. No place for snowflakes or sensitive hearts. When sentiment is left to chance, she'll send you back to your start. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switches to crumpet, bends them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. Verse by verse, exploring the text. She reads and recites, not knowing the tongue, learning every step of the way. Melts all your memories and feeds you facts. Her zeal is like fire, but her heart is of gold. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switch to crumpet, bans them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. Smooth moderator. 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 Ooh, moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator.
Good evening, happy Thursday. It is Thursday the 30th of April 2026 and we're in for tonight's exploration of a topic yet to be revealed. Dun dun dun. Okay, not having any panelists tonight. I've chosen to go solo because I think the topic that we're going to go into, I'd like to start it with a video. And so, without further ado, tonight's topic is Islam. What do we really know? I don't know if anyone listening or watching, lurking, loving, hating, whatever you're doing, is aware of my position on Islam. Thus far, I have concluded, and which is, it's not set in stone, but I have concluded that Islam is a death cult. A lot of people oppose that idea. A lot of people agree. Some people may not have even explored anything about Islam and don't really want to talk about it, which is fine. That's up to them. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a death cult. And so what I'd like to do, it came up in my recommended, a video, an interview by Winston Marshall, the guy from Mumford & Sons who left or parted ways with Mumford & Sons because they were woke and he didn't want to do woke. And he now has a great YouTube channel that I'll link in the description of this live. and he does interviews. Hang on, I'm going to cough. Interviewing various experts on a multitude of topics. So what I'm going to do is play the interview that's inspired me for tonight's topic, Islam. What do we really know? So without further ado, let's start this video.
The eminent scholar and author Ibn Warraq.
You cannot leave your religion. It's a one-way ticket, you know. You cannot leave Islam without being punished for it. Clearly states, you know, that apostasy is punishable by death. In my less charitable moments, I find that so-called moderate Muslims are really rather dishonest intellectually. They pretend that the real Islam is tolerant, that the real Islam is pro-women, real Islam is for freedom of expression. It's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Islamic slavery was far worse than anything that happened in the West. The Atlantic slave trade, Arabs shipped 17 million black Africans to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire, to Arabia. I've been quiet when I should have spoken up.
What held you back? Do you think Islam can be reformed? Hello and welcome to the Winston Marshall Show with me, Winston Marshall. I had the privilege of sitting down with historian, scholar, and author Ibn Warraq. Ibn has been writing about Islam and Muhammad for a long time. We took a deep dive into the history of Islam, the history of Muhammad, the evidence in the scripture, what the truth might be. We looked at previous guests, what they've said on this show. As you've been following, you will have similar questions to me. We also went into Ibn's life, his personal journey, his what I think is a very courageous journey, speaking up when few others feel they can. All of that and much more. Before listening, I ask, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. You press the subscribe button, I can have more wonderful, incredible guests like Ibn Warraq discussing the issues you want to hear about. But without further ado, Ibn Warraq. Maybe you can tell me and listeners and what viewers who don't know your story. I think it's quite amazing that you've from India originally. You became one of the preeminent scholars and writers, authors of several books, including Why I'm Not a Muslim, and you live under a pen name of a nom de plume to disguise your identity, as I've understood it, for reasons I'd like to hear about. But maybe you can tell your story from India to where you are now.
Yes, I was born in a city called Rajkot, which is still a part of India. In fact, Gandhi grew up there, although he was not born there. He was Gujarati. He was born on the coast in Porbandar. Anyway, my father was a nominal Muslim. His father persuaded him to leave India and go to the newly created state of Pakistan in 1947. So when I was just 1 and 1.5, we moved, my family and I, we moved to Karachi, Pakistan. And from there, my father thought there was no real future in this theocratic state like Pakistan, and decided to send it to England. As to say, me and my brother, who was 1.5 years older than I was. And I went to prep school and then to public school in the British sense in England. And I went on to Edinburgh University, where I studied Arabic and Persian, amongst other things. And then I became involved with some secular humanists. I realized I was really an atheist and certainly a humanist. And I got in touch with an organization called the Center for Inquiry, founded by a philosopher, American philosopher called Paul Kurtz. I started writing for them, for their magazine called Free Inquiry. And I wrote an article for them, a short article called Why I'm Not Muslim, because they had been looking for somebody to write something on Islam. They had a series of speakers, writers who wrote Why I'm Not and then a Mormon, Why I'm Not a Jew, Why I'm Not a Methodist, and so on.
Bertrand Russell's famous article, Why I'm Not a Christian.
Calc on his work. They couldn't find anybody to do something on Islam, so I volunteered to do it, and my article turned into a book. So,
why do you think they couldn't find anyone to do it on Islam?
Well, they just were not in touch with many ex-Muslims. They just did not know of any. It was much easier to, obviously in America at the time, it was in the 1990s, to find somebody, from the Christian religion and always offshoots.
Is that because there aren't many Muslim apostates, or is that because?
Well, at the time, this was, I think, around about 1989, I first wrote the article. They just didn't know that many people, many ex-Muslims. In fact, they were not used to having arguments or dialogues with Muslims generally at the time. And when they saw my name in some other journal, I forget what, they chopped at the idea of recruiting me to do this article on Why I'm Not Muslim.
Your turn from, was it more against Islam, or is it more towards atheism? Because your writing is very critical of Islam. At that point in your life, what was your spiritual journey? How did you become?
Well, I realized that I was really a skeptic, and my favorite reading by then, I was 18, 19 by then. I think I was married by now. Yeah, I was married, and my favorite authors are people like Gibbon and John Stuart Mill, various secular humanists in America, like Paul Kurtz himself. And I realized that I myself was a skeptic, really, and I was keen to do something for the Islamic side of things. And I had studied, I was not particularly brilliant student, but I had studied Arabic and so on at Edinburgh University. So I was happy to go back to those educational roots.
Was your interest in Arabic because of your interest in Islam at that point?
When I decided to go to Edinburgh, I wanted to really study European art history. But I had a kind of crisis of identity, and I thought perhaps I'll try and find out a little bit more about Islam and my Islamic identity. That's why I chose Arabic and Islamic studies at Edinburgh, which just happened to. I mean, it's a sheer coincidence, really, in a way. It had a very famous, reputable scholar of Islam, a man called Professor Montgomery Watt, who written a 3-volume biography of Muhammad, the Prophet, which was very positive. One of the earliest really positive biographies of Muhammad. This was must have been written in the late 60s, I think. I can't remember the exact dates now. But so, yeah, that was one of the reasons I chose Islam, to get at my roots, my intellectual roots.
Having a crisis of identity at that age is interesting. This is one of the phenomena I think we're seeing in Britain, particularly of second generation immigrants to Britain, where they don't necessarily feel at home in English culture, so they turn towards their Muslim heritage and to the mosques, and that seems to be one of the crux points of the problems of integration at the moment in Britain. I wonder if you have insight into that. Why do you think you had an identity crisis?
One of the reasons is I wasn't sure that I would really ever be really accepted as an Englishman. I mean, I really, in my head, in my upbringing and so on, up from the age of 10 onwards, I had become an Englishman. I wrote about that in one of my books. When I was, above all, when I was coming back into England from a trip abroad in France, for example, I remember arriving at Dover with I think I still had a Pakistani passport at the time, and being asked, where I was from and so on. And then people later on would say, "Where are you really from?" And I got rather upset at times. And then
when that was on account of your race, or
because of my looks,
Pakistani?
I didn't look. Yeah, exactly. It was based on looks essentially. In fact, I remember once when I was studying philosophy afterward at Birkbeck College, I mentioned the fact that I thought Bertrand Russell had a wonderful literary style. And my friend saying to me, "Well, yeah, of course you would notice that, because an Englishman wouldn't notice that. You're being foreigner would notice that."
What a peculiar comment.
It was very odd, and I felt very upset about that as well. So, I mean, if you don't speak well, you're not English. If you speak well, you're speaking too well. No Englishman speaks so correctly, and so on.
So there's a sort of irony then, is that you lent in towards your Muslim heritage because of an identity crisis, not feeling included, or not feeling like English people were necessarily including you as English. And then you come out the other end an atheist. So, so rejecting you.
I realized that, that I really wasn't a Muslim, that it didn't help me at all going back to my Islamic roots.
So then there must have been a second identity crisis.
Yes, I was happy to acknowledge the fact that I was not a Muslim. And I was happy to write about my acquired Englishness. I was heavily into Englishness of English art, a la Pevsner, and I identified. I used to go to holidays in Norfolk, so the Norwich School of Painters and Artists and so on. I liked the Englishness of painters like Samuel Palmer and Mary Russell. It's the woman who wrote Our Village. Anyway,
so it resonated with you.
Yes. I felt, Hausmann's poetry, and it was very much. I went to
Huysmans French, though, isn't he?
Hausmann, no, A. Hausmann, no.
Oh, sorry. I'm thinking.
I meant he wrote about Ludlow and Shropshire, the Shropshire lad. But in fact, he grew up in Worcestershire. That's where my prep school was. So I identified with him and his poetry. And there was also regional writers at that time. A man called who wrote under the pen name B.B. just with inverted commas around the two B's. And so many other things which resonated more with me than anything. That in fact, I no longer spoke any Urdu, which is the language I was born into, and a dialect which we spoke at home. We spoke Kutchi, which is related to Sindhi. we used to speak Kutchi with my grandmother. My mother was already dead when I was 1. And we spoke Urdu to my father, which is strange, but and the national language at the time in Pakistan was Urdu. So I'd forgotten by the time, after 3 years, I was really losing most of my, original languages.
What did your family make of you rejecting Islam?
No, they don't know. Still don't know. My father died while I was at Edinburgh in 1968. And my mother, I never knew. My brother doesn't know I've written all these books.
How could he not?
Well, because of the pen name. That's one of the reasons why I have a pen name, is to protect them. He wouldn't. My brother is a gentle soul. He would not dream of harming me. But I was afraid that relatives might take it out on him. My atheism and my apostasy might blow back on him. And I'm glad I chose a pen name in the end. In fact, one Financial Times, I think it was, journalist suggested I reveal my real name, and then I was okay, I'll do it. And then he said, "Are you sure you really want to do it?" And I thought again about it, and I realized no, it would be just too much. And also, I was married by then. I had 2 children, and I thought it would put their lives in danger.
Why is it that you would put their lives in danger? Why is it that you felt that your brother might be under threat? Is this something that's unique to your family? Is this something that's unique to Islam? There's certainly, I've had Ayan Hirsi Ali, our mutual friend, on the show, famously has a fatwa, Salman Rushdie fatwa. Is it an Islam problem?
It is.
Or is it a more
No, it is
family issue?
Very much an Islam problem, and but also a social, I don't know whether it's Islamic social circumstances or there tends to be very little private life in Islamic countries, especially Pakistan. People feel that they have the right to question you about the way you're bringing up your children and so on. In fact, amazingly enough, when I was going through Pakistan, almost exactly to the day, 30 years after I'd left, I was working for a French travel agency called Fram Voyage, and I was taking French tourists to Bangkok, and we had to pass through Karachi. And I took some time off to go and see one of my father's friends. And the first question, he hadn't seen me for 30 years, the very literally first question was, "Your children Muslim?" So, "Are you bringing them up as Muslims?" And I already felt threatened. I hadn't written anything by then. This was about 1986. I left Pakistan at 1956, so exactly 30.
And that was a threat, not just a open question. It was
it felt very much like a threat to me. And then, of course, 3 years later, in 89, you had the famous Rushdie fatwa. There is very little respect for private space in Islam and in Islamic countries, anyway.
Is that a cultural issue, or is that a theological? How much is that tied to the religion itself? Or you could go from country to country, and it's very different norms in different Muslim countries.
It's very much a theological question. You cannot leave your religion. It's a one-way ticket. You cannot leave Islam without being punished for it.
Where are the roots of that? Is that from the Quran? Is that from
it is
Hadith?
Interpretations of various verses in the Quran. I think I mention it in one of my books. it's in the hadith as well that apostates must be killed. They must be given a chance to recant, and then on the third, after the fourth occasion, then must be put to death. It is definitely there in the Quran. And the theologians like Maududi, who's a Indian who became the spokesman for Pakistan. He was born obviously before partition, and he clearly states, that apostasy is punishable by death. Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, we might be going now into a little bit into theology, and I'd love to come back to your story, but is this a fundamentalist Islam issue? Do you separate between Islam and fundamentalist Islam? There are peaceful sects of Islam. Is it pronounced
Ismailis,
yeah, for example, high achieving group. If you look at, I look at the Emiratis today as leading the way for a peaceful Islam on a geopolitical on that scale, and there seems to be that is it drastic to paint tar the whole 1 however many billion Muslims with the same brush, or is there separation there? Is there different sides to Islam?
I want to take this as an opportunity to have a break. I need to get a cuppa. But thus far, what's been said backs up my conclusion that Islam is a death cult, going off what he was saying about apostasy. The question that's just been asked will hopefully enlighten us as to whether it's in every sect, if you want to call it that, of Islam. But let's have a break. Let's have a cup of tea. Let's play a tune.
Exploring consciousness. What does it mean? Looking up definitions, watching narratives fall apart at the seams. From the realm of the dead, stumbling through fractured reality. Truth is a needle in a haystack, wondering what happened to me. Exploring happiness, what does it mean? Looking up definitions, watching narratives fall apart at the seams. Was it all a bad dream? What on earth could have happened to me? Truth is a needle in a haystack, discern fake from reality. Time lost, pitch black, dopamine hits, thinking slow and fast. Watch a narrative fall apart at the seams. Waking up, waking up. Watch a narrative fall apart at the seams. Waking up, waking up, waking up, waking up, waking up. Listen, is it true? Is it real? You see, people believe in karma, but I see a load of bitter revenge. People manipulating, making things happen. Listen, in the end, no one heals. They're hooked on revenge. Believing in possibilities, giving into hopeless mindsets. Believing in punishment, unaffordable rehabilitation. You see, people don't wanna hear about inclusion, at least not until they're faced with exclusion. Listen, in the end, no one heals. They're hooked on revenge. Listen, is it true? Is it real? Is it true? Is it real? Listen, is it true? Is it real? Listen, is it true? Is it real? Listen, is it true? Is it real?
Okie dokie. Let's continue with our Winston Marshall interview.
Well, it's a question which is difficult to answer because I don't know. There are various so-called moderate Muslims who will be present on Wednesday when I speak, like Dr. Zudi Jassa, who says he's a moderate Muslim. He doesn't believe in jihad and all the, but
You're speaking, sorry, at Ayan Hirsi Ali's foundation in Washington, D.C.
that's right, on the 15th,
on the topic of
on defending the West from all her detractors, her enemies, internal and external.
Well, we'll come back to that. But sorry, you were saying about the different Islams and moderate Muslims.
Yes. Now, I find that a very useful distinction, which I found in Bernard Lewis, who in fact became a friend. But he makes very little use of it, oddly enough. He just threw it out in one of his prefaces, which is between Islam 1, Islam 2, and Islam 3. Islam 1 is what's in the Quran and the what the theologians developed. Okay, Islam 2 is what's in the Hadith and what the theologians constructed. And Islam 3 is Islamic civilization, what Muslims actually do rather than what they should do. So, for example, until recently, oddly enough, very ironical in a sense, homosexuality was much more tolerated in Islamic countries. And I quote, I forget which one of my books, my first one, I think, Why I'm Not a Muslim, the story told by an anthropologist, a British anthropologist, about how young boys were married off to grown men, and the whole ceremony was very much celebrated in public in a village in Egypt. It was quite open. And then there are stories.
What period is this? What year is it?
1930s. This he was writing in the 1930s.
As recently as the 1930s, that was happening.
Yeah. And there's I quote one story in my book. Compton Mackenzie, who's not much read these days, wrote a story about homosexuality. It must have been one of the earliest novels in English, written in the 1950s, about an English homosexual who went to North Africa, where he found that people were much more tolerant of his lifestyle.
So what changed then? What happened?
Well, this is a new, more fundamentalist strain came into existence, especially with the rise of Khomeini.
So that's from 79, though.
70s.
So you think 1979 is the kind, or the 70s?
I think so, yeah.
It's the change point.
But 79, if you like, yeah.
So not just in the Shia Islamic world, across the entire.
He influenced. His influence went across all these.
How would that be? Because I thought that there was quite a big contention between the Shia and the Sunni. How did his reach go across the Sunni world?
It did, because they found whatever they needed in his fundamentalist interpretation. Sayyid Qutb was a Sunni, but he drew inspiration from Maududi, for example.
Qutb was writing in the 20s. Is that right?
No, he was right. He wrote in the 60s, early 60s. Okay. I think he was executed in 66. I forget now. But he's certainly drew inspiration from whatever, across various boundaries. There's a lot of American analysts got this idea in their head that Sunnis and the Shias they never cooperate, that we're okay, we don't need to worry about Khomeini getting together with some regimes in the rest of the Islamic world, and they were proved wrong. And then now I'm not sure what the situation is. I know various intellectuals in the Islamic world were very much impressed with Khomeini and his uncompromising stance on these issues.
So they were impressed by his going back to more fundamental, literal interpretation of Muhammad's and his teachings in the Quran.
Right. Now, to answer your question, you do get some Islam 3, you get Muslims who are moderate, but Islam itself is not moderate. If you like, Islam 1 and 2 are not moderate. Islam 3, people who within Islamic civilization, some of them are moderate, some of them are not fundamentalists. But if you stick to the strict theology, then it is fundamentalist. What percentage and so on, I don't know.
Well, I can throw a quick percentage out, which I found very eye-opening, to say the least. This is from about a month ago. The Henry Jackson Society published statistics about British Muslims, and there's about 4 million British Muslims. 76% don't believe there was rape and murder on October 7th in Israel, and a large percent support Hamas. So I'm quite curious, and I've asked previous guests about the moderate Muslims and who represents them. Where are those voices? I had Ed Hussein on the show, and I think he is one of the great moderate Islam voices, or moderate Muslim voices. But I'm trying to get a context of how far spread or how widespread his version of Islam is. I wondered if you had insight into that.
No, I find that in my less charitable moments, I find that so-called moderate Muslims are really rather dishonest intellectually. They pretend that the real Islam is tolerant, that the real Islam is pro-women, that the real Islam is for freedom of expression. It's just it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Based on the scripture.
Yes, exactly. If you base it on Islam's 1 and 2, it clearly isn't. So, I mean, in a sense, who's been more? I suppose I could be accused of essentialism, saying what Islam is and Islam isn't. It's not up to me to decide. I'm not a Muslim anymore.
So hang on. The moderate Muslims, meaning the so-called peaceful Muslims, the ones who aren't extremists, purportedly aren't extremists, are dishonest because they lie about what Islam is, and therefore they still cannot be trusted. Okay.
Incidentally, I don't trust Ed Hussein at all. But
why not?
I think he indulges in double speak, but anyway, that's another matter.
Do you don't think it's an honest attempt to try and square Islam with modern temperaments and
No, I don't. I really don't. I think he was working with Douglas Murray in Social Cohesion Society or
Center for Social
Institute
Cohesion
or whatever.
So, yeah.
Was he working with them? I think so.
I'm not sure, but I know that Douglas is involved in that.
Their very presence in that institute inhibited many of the people there because of their Muslim presence. Even now, I'm going to be speaking on the 15th in Washington. And I know there will be Zuhdi Jasser in the audience and a couple of other.
Who's Zuhdi Jasser?
He's an American of Syrian origin. He's a doctor. He's standing for.
Oh, I've heard him speak. But sorry, go on. For the listeners who don't know, yeah.
He's going to be present. And his very presence has made me. Inhibited, has made me embarrassed because I say I'm talking about, for example, slavery and the fact that Islamic slavery was far worse than anything that happened in the West. The Atlantic slave trade, the Islamic slavery, and they shipped 17 million, the top figure. Arabs shipped 17 million Black Africans to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire, to Arabia, and further afield.
Over what period? That was
centuries earlier than anything that started by the Europeans. starting from this before the 7th century when Islam set in, and there was a higher death rate because it involved the castration of young black males, and there was no anesthetic, and thousands died, millions died on the way. So it was gruesome, and and abolition movement did not take root in the Islamic world. In the Ottoman Empire, there was firm resistance to it. Whereas it's very much a Western concept, abolition. It was very much a Western Christian initiative. People like William Wilberforce and Henry Thornton and so on. The Quakers especially, but it did not resonate with the Islamic world.
We'll come back to your point about why you feel inhibited from speaking today, but I kind of want to explore this history because I think some listeners and viewers might not really have a very good understanding of Islamic history necessarily. And we can go all the way to Muhammad, and maybe we'll come to that later, but seeing as we're on slavery, it seems to me that post-Muhammad, up until the slave trade and beyond, it's a very bloody history. And if you look at the Islamic wars moving from the Arabian Peninsula and or the Islamic, I guess, colonialist imperial project, all the way to India, where 110 million Mughals, am I got that right, were killed, i.e. the biggest genocide in human history. 110 million Sikhs were killed under the Mughal Empire. Can you paint a bit of a picture that for people who don't necessarily know that Islam history?
The traditional dates to start the Islamic Empire began really at the death of the Prophet Muhammad, was 632 AD after Christ. And it spread very, very quickly to North Africa, then the Byzantine Empire, it was slowly taken over. And then they got as far as Poitiers in France, and they conquered most of Spain and so on. By the time that they overran, there were the Berber dynasties in North Africa, and then they arrived at the gates of India also in the 8th century with Mahmud of Ghazni and so on. And then later on, the Mughals didn't arrive until late 15th century. But soon, they were overrunning most of what used to be the classical world, Rome and Greece, and so on.
I made a mistake earlier. It was actually the Hindus as well as the Sikhs. I didn't, but sorry, in India. But forgive me. So it was the genocide of the Hindus in India. I made a mistake earlier saying it was the Sikhs. But there's a bloody history that doesn't seem that we have either completely forgotten or never really knew about in the West. There's an amnesia or something that's going on that we in denial of it. I wonder even if Muslims today are aware of the bloody conquest of Islam.
The most tolerant Mughal emperor was Emperor Akbar. He actually turned against Islam. He was an apostate emperor. He encouraged Hinduism. He had lots of Hindu wives and so on. He renounced Islam, but he was followed immediately by his grandson. It must have been, I guess. Aurangzeb, I forget the dates now. In the 17th century, he was the most intolerant of all the Mughals. This is following Akbar, who was the most tolerant, to Aurangzeb, who he destroyed. I have lots of statistics for the number of temples, Hindu temples destroyed. This was known as the Furor Islamicus. to Indian art historians, destruction committed by the intolerant Muslims who didn't want anything to do with the idolatry, as they termed it, of the Hindus. So they went around trying to eradicate Hinduism from the subcontinent.
What about then slavery? Coming back to slavery, is there a sense that Islam has dealt with that? You know, in the West, the last few years, the issue of slavery has been brought up, and the part played by the West and the slavery in America, trying to atone for those sins, has become a very important part of the discourse. Is there any such discourse in the Islamic world?
Not at all. Not at all. Not an ounce of self-doubt or self-questioning. There's no self-criticism in Islam. It's considered a taboo subject. The United States, the total number of slaves who came, 12 million were shipped across the Atlantic. Do you know how many came to the United States?
About 200,000-300,000, right?
388,000, exactly.
Well, the problem with that statistic is that by comparison, it's interesting because we would many people would guess a lot more. But don't forget that there were many millions who were slaved, who were the offspring and progeny of those imported.
Yes.
So it's not quite that simple. Well, maybe that's not the point you were going to make.
If you're talking about reparations, for example, only about how many white people owned slaves? Something like just under 2% of the whites actually owned black slaves. 98% of the whites are asked to pay reparations, and it's another issue, moral dimension to this. But the thing is, Islamic countries have never, ever been asked to pay reparations. And yet the United States, we had only 388,000 shipped over originally. Far more was sent across the Arabian desert. And then the West has poured in more than $400 billion into Africa since, out of a sense of guilt. $400 billion. What happened to them? Still, Africa, south of Sahara, contains some of the poorest countries. Level of education, level of healthcare, and so on. So, I mean, that's not the answer to their problems. No, more and more African leaders are recognizing that we can't blame everything on slavery in the way that African Americans attribute all their present failures to slavery. Lack of education, lack of breakup of marriages and so on. One-parent families, the greater number in African American. But it cannot possibly be attributed to slavery. But in fact, blacks generally, before in the 19th century, there were more black marriages than white ones. In fact,
Thomas Scholl shows that it's bizarrely what one might think, it's from the civil rights movement later that the fact that black African American families, there's the breakdown in families, but before then there's actually quite high marriage rates.
Right.
So, okay, back to the issue of slavery in Islam. Is there no sense of guilt, as you described, because of something to do with the theology? Is
yes,
slavery permitted in Islam?
Yes, slavery was recognized by the Quran, definitely. Maybe it's encouraged. The manumission or the liberation of slaves is encouraged, but certainly it is there. It's accepted. It was accepted right up to the 1950s. There were black slaves being even now 21st century in the Sudan. You can find slave markets.
ISIS treated the Yazidis, take them in as slaves.
Indeed.
So that's in the scripture, you think?
It certainly, it was accepted social practice, I guess. I don't know how much it depends on the theology. I don't know. I really can't remember.
If you are a Muslim, how do you deal with the scripture like that, or scripture about how they treat women, how they treat apostates, how you've previously examined? How can one tackle that difficulty?
Really, exactly. That's what I was saying earlier. Is you can't do it with any real honesty, because if you think that the Quran is the actual literal word of God, then you would have to, somewhere along the line, you have to say it's no longer applicable. I know it's the word of God, but that was meant for 8th century, 7th century Arabia. It's no longer applicable to us. It was designed to deal with the situation back then. Is that option available to modern Muslims? People like Khomeini would say no. It's a eternal word of God. It's applicable for always. It is your duty to promulgate these laws in the present.
And it says through the Quran, one must take this literally. It says that throughout the Quran.
Yeah.
So actually, you would argue that Khomeini, or Khamenei now, they are intellectually honest.
At least, yes. They've been consistent
with the scripture.
Exactly.
Before going back to your previous point, I just want to ask about the historic Muhammad. So this seems quite fundamental to me. Who was Muhammad? This is something you've written about, the quest for historical Muhammad, a famous book that you edited. This is an issue that came up actually in my conversation with Ed Hussein. Now, I'll start with the tricky issue of Muhammad's wives. I brought up the fact that Muhammad is alleged to have had a 6-year-old wife and consummated when she was 9, which is obviously a very difficult or inconvenient issue, inconvenient thing. But he said I was wrong. He said that firstly, that was contested. Secondly, that was the evidence of that was written 90 years later. And there is other evidence that that specific wife was actually older. I'm quite interested by that. And seeing as you've studied it, do you think Ed is right in saying that, or is there more to the story about?
No, that just shows you the kind of dishonesty you get involved in.
What's the truth about that young wife?
One thing is true, that all our knowledge of the lives of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, are based on literary evidence, which some of it dates more than 300 years after his supposed death. So there are no surviving extant, documents which are contemporaneous with Muhammad,
including the Quran.
Including the Quran. We don't know what the origin of the Quran. In my view, the Quran has very little to do with somebody called Muhammad. That's another issue.
We'll come back to that.
Come back. So our knowledge, Hussein is right in one sense, that our knowledge of all the his wives, what he did, and so on, are contained in the Hadith. The Hadiths were written over 300 years after his death. So how can but see, somebody like Hussein will argue about the details of his life, but when it becomes inconvenient, he will bring up the idea of lateness of the sources. But if they're late, they're late for everything. I mean, not a single aspect of his life is authentic. It's all made up centuries later, and it's true that in order to sanctify, to justify a current practice, many people invented hadith and then retrojected it to this mythical past to justify present practices. So if you had somebody who was into young girls, he comes up with this story that Muhammad was married to a 9-year-old or 8-year-old, consummated when she was 9, I forget the detail. And this is true for all these things, like stoning to death for adultery and so on and so on. So either you throw out everything that we know, supposedly that we know about Muhammad, you pick and choose. But then, I mean, why is one story better than the other? And then you come up with this nonsense about the wonderful memories. You have to invent how the Arabs had this fantastic memory and they could remember things over 200 years. And they passed down this tradition. You had this long list of chain of authorities. In fact, if you look at all the hadith, they're incredibly childish. You know, you have a story of a bunch of men, soldiers, sitting around a campfire. And he says, you know, I remember the Prophet saying to me once that one mustn't use a toothpick after eating something.
The first time I sat down to read the hadith, I think maybe the third passage was about farting. Is that when it was appropriate to fart and not fart?
Right.
So, yeah.
You know, how anybody can take any of this nonsense seriously, and that Western scholars, historians, have accepted it for all these years. It's just unbelievable. It's unbelievable how they've been uncritical in their look at the sources for our knowledge of early Islam. So that's why I think we don't know where this book called the Quran actually comes from. We really don't. The stories of it's being passed down through oral tradition, and that it is just nonsense, a complete nonsense.
So where the moderate Muslims, though, might be right is that you don't necessarily have to take it literally, because we don't know what's true and what's literal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually is there not room for hope there that given that we don't know, then you could say there's legitimate reasons that you can edit out or change things.
Yeah, I agree.
Because you could
but
challenge
you would
the
have to
legitimacy of
then
the sources.
say that our knowledge of the Quran, where it came from, is pretty shaky.
What do we know anything at all that we can say? Do you agree that there was a man called Muhammad in the Arabian Desert?
I'm not certain that there is somebody called Muhammad. No, it is very, very much rather a coincidence. This name, which means the praised one, that he should have had this name. It's just not. It's just not credible. I think what happened is a bit like Robin Hood. Okay, this traditional story of Robin Hood, as seen in the movies of Errol Flynn or somebody. Little John, Prior Tuck, of the minstrel, forgot his name. These are obviously literary creations. There may have been some rebel, was it 12th century, 11th century, I forget. Robin Hood is 11th, it's time of the Crusades, 10th, 11th century. There may have been somebody in 11th century who occasionally attacked rich merchants or somebody, but the rest of the story that we know, which has been passed down to us, is literary creation.
A better analogy might be King Arthur, because
that's another one.
King Arthur, we don't know that there's no evidence that it existed, but it's possible that there was someone fighting the Anglo-Saxons coming over some sort of Britain, and he is the foundational myth in some ways of England's national myth.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so Muhammad, you don't accept that there's necessarily a real Muhammad, but what happened immediately after Muhammad suggests that there was some sort of inspiration, because straight away you have this conquest from that region that spreads out across the world, as you described earlier. So something happened that inspired that.
I wouldn't know how to characterize that. Did they consciously create a myth? I don't know. I really don't know.
As well as speaking to Ed Hussein, I spoke to Ayan Hirsi Ali, our mutual friend, and her take on it is that there was Muhammad at the time of Mecca, a peaceful man trying to spread some good messages, and then and this ties in with Ed's version, is that after a period of time, his message wasn't getting anywhere. So you get the Medina version of Muhammad, who is a fighter, a warmonger, and with the Medina version of Muhammad, we have associated all the parts of the Quran which are far more anti-Semitic, far more brutal. Do you accept any of that narrative?
No, not of
What's wrong with that narrative?
None of it makes any sense.
Tell me why Ayan and Ed are both wrong then.
This is based on the traditional picture. The notion of Mecca and Medina is already a literary construct made by the apologists of Islam. There's no evidence that Islam started in Mecca. Absolutely none whatsoever. It's all based on literary sources 200 years afterwards, including the Mecca and Medina business. Really, now, even on their own account, it doesn't make sense, because even if you accept this traditional picture of Mecca and Medina, it's in fact so early and later, early Mecca, later Medina. In fact, the so-called verses of the sword, some of them in fact are early. They're not later.
How do you know they're earlier?
Well, exactly. This is another. Exactly. How would you decide?
Okay.
The whole thing is nonsense. That's why I've been working. I'm one of the founding members, really, of a group of basically French, German, Belgian scholars who created a group called the Inara group. Inara means enlightenment in Arabic. And they've been the only group which has been critical of the sources, critical of the traditional picture. And they've been chipping away at the traditional picture since 2007, I think. So nearly 25 years. And one of the things they established, if the language of Arabic had I'll get this argument right. If it had been born in Mecca, it would have been more natural for them to write that language using South Arabian writing system, because the South Arabian writing system allowed for sounds which you difficult to transliterate in the Arabic that we know. There's a scholar called John Wansborough, an American who lived and worked in fact, he lived not far from where I ended up in Southwest France. John Wansborough, he said that people started fabricating so-called pre-Islamic poetry. But this was all invented to give the Arabic language a venerable antiquity. They would invent it in the 8th century and then reject it on its past. But there's no way that this poetry reflects anything to do with pre-Islamic Arabia, because our knowledge of pre-Islamic Arabia, again, is based on very late sources. There's no way of getting around the lack of sources, the written sources.
So yeah, the message I'm getting is that there's no real evidence for it. Another thing that's curious about the Quran is that there's a lot of pieces of Jewish and Christian history, or rather more specifically, stories from the scripture of Jewish and Christian scripture. And this is actually something that the historian Tom Holland wrote about, in that it's almost like, I think it's, he wrote a history doing the historical, what we know historically about the Jews, the Christians, and Islam, the foundations of those religions. And he said, if you read the Quran, and I sort of agree with this, it's almost like someone's misremembered aspects of Jewish and Christian scripture.
He got all that from me, by the way.
Oh, he plagiarized you?
Yeah. he was, that's another one. I won't go into that.
No, go on.
But he picked my brains. We spent hours together, and I sent
you and Tom Holland, yeah,
in London. And I sent him so many articles, so many he'd never heard of, books he had never heard of. Since he doesn't know German, I had to find translators for the German scholarship on him. And then he wrote, based a lot on my sources there, my early anthology there. And then I asked him, why did you not thank me? He said, I forgot.
Tom Holland, if you're listening, I think you owe Mr. Dvorak a thank you.
He said he would correct that in future editions, but I don't think he ever did. I never looked at any later editions. I couldn't be bothered.
Did you read his book?
No, I haven't actually read it. In the Shadow of the Sword.
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's where he comes from you. Really, this is the book you need to go to. You want to? Can we go back to your point earlier? So you're here in DC now, and you have said you're speaking at a conference in. Sorry, we're not in DC. We're in New York, but you're going to DC. You're speaking at a conference with Iran, and there are other Muslims present, and their presence makes you feel inhibited to speak truthfully. Why are you inhibited by their presence?
Bad manners. I feel a bit embarrassed, but
or the opposite, good manners. You're too mannered to speak how you feel or what you think.
Yeah, I'm too. And I suppose I don't want to hurt anybody's sensibilities. I mean, I'm not going to censor myself. I'm going to speak exactly what I wrote down, in fact. And we'll see how it goes. We'll see how they react to it. There's some women there, even some women who with their hijab. Why she's been invited, I don't know. Anyway.
Do you think Islam can be reformed?
No, I don't think so.
You don't?
I think that people, in my last book on atheism and free thought in Islam, it's called Losing the Allah Delusion. Leaving the Allah Delusion behind. I show that there is an incredible rise in ex-Muslims around the Islamic world, but people, of course, still incredibly frightened of mentioning it in public because of obvious reasons: danger to the family, fear of social ostracism, and not wishing to upset the parents, family members, and so on. But it's an enormous, it's a huge movement. It's an absolutely huge movement. It's not just a few people here and there. It's now a real tsunami, you express it.
Of Muslim apostates.
Yeah.
Where I don't see that. Where is that happening?
It's online. It's online. It has to be for various political and social reasons.
Across the world, across the West?
No, across the Islamic world. You'd have to look at my book, and then it's called "Leaving the Allah Delusion Behind."
So since October 7th, one would be forgiven for getting quite a different impression, because as we've seen, I'm from London. Almost not every weekend, but many weekends since October 7th, we have mass protests. It's not just Muslim groups, but it's also there's, I guess, leftist white British groups, but there's a lot of Muslim groups. We've already talked about what British Muslims think about October 7th in this conversation. And at time of speaking, last night was the Eurovision contest in Malmo, Sweden, which is now 1/5, I think, either Muslim or immigrant population. Tens of thousands of protesters outside of the stadium where the Israeli singer was singing. Inside the arena, while she was singing, you can see footage where everyone's booing and hissing her. We're seeing this across Europe. It actually looks like quite a different story, that actually Muslims are very confident. They have a very different worldview to Westerners. And we have an issue of assimilation and integration with these two groups living beside each other. And you live in France. We've seen a lot of that in France. We've seen a lot of the Islamist attacks. So you say, on the one hand, there's a tsunami of apostates, but that doesn't really look like it if you follow the news.
No, because the reason I say people are scared of revealing that.
But it's not just about scared, because they're taking the streets in the name of their faith.
I'd have to put a figure on this. I don't know how many in terms of numbers. I've no idea. But I think you would get different picture from what you describe. If you read my testimonies of people who left, the number of people who are no longer afraid to speak up, but it's still a minority who speak up. But I think the actual number of who actually are is greater. I have no way of proving all that.
What do you make of what you've seen in Europe since October 7th? What's your impression of the protests?
Yeah, I find it very, very frightening, very disappointing. The politicians haven't been firm enough. They have not stood up against this barbarity. But I'm a little bit isolated where I am.
Given your personal story is one of coming to England and really feeling like an Englishman before feeling rejected by others. So your life is one where you've contested with the issues of integration. It almost felt like you were rejected. You felt rejected at some point. But given the huge demographic changes in Europe through mass migration, this is a question I think we really need to address. We really need to talk about. Politicians need to talk about it for social cohesion, if nothing else. I wondered if you had insight, not only on a personal level, on a societal level, and how we should approach these two worldviews of people living side by side.
I think it won't help if you pretend that the situation isn't what it is. You must speak up, and there should be zero tolerance of imams, religious leaders in the Islamic world in Europe who spout hatred of Jews, of the West generally. Nobody wants to speak up. I give examples in my, I forget, there are all sorts of complacent, especially left-wing, this is a left-wing phenomenon. What I was going to say my friend, I've never actually met him, a writer called Michel Onfray. He wrote a book called The Art of Being French in French. And he has a chapter which I translated and had published on Jihad Watch. It's called Islamo-Gauchism.
Oh, yes.
I don't know whether you saw that, but it's a very much left-wing defense, basically, of Islamic barbarism. The refusal to criticize any aspect of Islam whatsoever. It's just unbelievable what they should read this article, that I've translated. It's quite frightening. These are they're totally inconsistent. Well, how can you expect a Moroccan Muslim to integrate into a society which is being taught is in corrupt and filth and it's sinking? Who wants to integrate into a sinking ship? The left wingers have been teaching everybody, the whole population, to hate the West. And this has got to stop. So you've got to put up some defense in the way that I was trying to do on Wednesday.
Yeah, so this is what your speech is going to be about.
Yes, defending the West and how what the it's based on exaggeration and complete fabrication of numbers and figures. Like Ward Churchill, who was at the University of Colorado, who actually was thrown out for fraud. He said something like 32 million. I'll have to look at my notes. I can't remember the figures, but he plucks out of the air. It's all in his book. But so many million Indians and indigenous people were massacred by the Europeans. Whereas, in fact, for example, there's a website which says that 7 million, this is funded by the US government, 7 million Taino Indians on Hispaniola, the island that Columbus landed on, 7 million were exterminated. The total population of this island was 250,000. I get 7. This is the kind of exaggeration.
In North America, the estimates now it's 10 million were killed of indigenous Americans.
Yeah.
But something like 90% of that, 95% was from disease that went ahead of the people, before the people even. It's horrendous, obviously, but we don't get the right picture of what actually happened.
In fact, there was a series of articles in The Spectator. Did you read those? in the London version by Finn Paul. Jeff Finn, and I rely a lot on his book for. Unfortunately, he's frustrating. He doesn't give the proper references. I wrote to him about it, and he was very blasé about it. But anyway,
So you like your references? You check everything, and
yeah, I have to. I can't rely on
a real historian.
If somebody says so, I have to check that this is in fact.
If only everyone was like that. That's a good way to be. So you're going to talk about the threat to the West, and part of that is that an undermining of Western history. We talked earlier about slavery, mentioning now a rewriting of history that's gone on in the founding of America and what really happened there. We've talked about Islam, although that's perhaps more of a European issue at the moment rather than it is North American. What are the other threats to the West that you see?
It's the clue to everything. It undermines the confidence of ordinary Americans to hold their head up high. If they've been told that your ancestor did this and that, when it's not in fact true, it's bound to undermine confidence in your own civilization. I think just setting the record straight alone would count for something. But
Okay, that's almost the end of that video. And they're now going into discussing what Islam's like in America and all the rest of it. I think we've watched enough of him to get his take on Islam, and that it cannot be reformed, in his opinion. That he believes that one cannot leave Islam without the threat of death, and therefore a lot of people may have left Islam, but no one knows that they've left Islam, therefore they have to live a lie out of fear that, they'll be harmed at the very least. It would be interesting to know more in depth, like his reasons for those answers. I don't feel as though, it wasn't fully answered, all of that. But that's a guy who was born into Islam, and that's his take on it. And he does seem knowledgeable. We will cover this topic again. This is just the beginning. That was just, I've not watched this video, so we've watched it together. And yeah, I didn't know what to expect of that. And that's what inspired me to bring this topic to this evening's exploration. So I'm going to thank everyone who's been here, there and everywhere with me in this exploration, whether you've smashed the like button or not, whether you've just been lurking or you've actually interacted with me. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you next week for next week's exploration.
She's laughing with a whiteboard clear, unpacking a fresh pack of pens, never willing to accept of fear. She's loved in many channels, every gate chained on nights and black blue lights. Heaven help them when she recites. Mysterious life, girl got skills. She moves in space with minimum waste and maximum joy. Makeshift desk and a cat that bites. When you see her coming, take your pills. No place for snowflakes or sensitive hearts. When sentiment is left to chance, she'll send you back to your start. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switches to crumpet, bends them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. verse by verse, exploring the text. She reads and recites, not knowing the tongue, learning every step of the way. Melts all your memories and feeds you facts. Her zeal is like fire, but her heart is of gold. We all know it, she's a smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Smooth moderator. Toast to toast, sometimes switch to crumpet, bands them to jail. Across social media, buy memberships for bail. Smooth moderator.